The first 11 seasons of WIDM, which I covered last May, were the easy part.
They established the formula and played within the lines for the majority of the run. I had my issues with the show as it took its time to figure itself out, but once it got to that sweet spot, I really enjoyed seasons 8 through 11, and I do think fondly about a lot of the civilian seasons and some of the awkward early celeb seasons. But many colleagues considered the peak of the show that period from 8 to 11, and now the rest of the series' run would be occasionally littered with standouts, but ultimately lack the catharsis of finally finding good mole seasons that I saw with the Peter Yan seasons. This next stretch of the show had its defenders, but people also point to developments from this era as things that weakened the show for years to come.
So this video, part 2 of my year-long quest to cover all of WIDM, covers 8 seasons. A low number, yes, but I realized midway through production that this video, which is already a part 2, needed to be 2 parts. So I have to make a part 3. The madness continues.
Here I'll be covering 7 regular seasons, plus 1 season of the Junior edition that I originally was not going to cover. Helpfully, they're all hosted by the same guy. Now, to remind you of where we left off, at the end of Season 11, Art Rooijakkers wins the show by unmasking Patrick Stoph in what would ultimately become Peter Jan Hagens' last season.
It seems like a cut-and-dry win, and then you think about it.
Art was in an alliance with Patrick all game, a very tight alliance. They shared information. Once Art figured out that it was Patrick, which wasn't very hard to do, he guaranteed himself a win by having more information than anyone else in the game. Some might consider this an insightful and impressive win, others might consider it cheating.
Still, the producers responded to Art breaking the game in a somewhat predictable manner. They asked him to host the show.
Season 12, which ran from January to March 2012.
It's become a tradition for these videos to begin with me covering a season that doesn't have subtitles, and that's somewhat the case for Season 12, as most of the subbed versions of these episodes have been scrubbed from my online sources. So I had half of these seasons subbed and the other half unsubbed, and so I was sort of going back and forth on different versions of it. And thankfully I could comprehend enough of the action to get a sense of what exactly was going on here, but the thing about Season 12 is that not really a lot went on here.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
Season 12 begins with 4 episodes in Iceland. They weren't supposed to be in Iceland. The plan was to do 4 episodes in Morocco, but travel issues made it more feasible to go to Iceland, and seeing as most of the challenges had been tailored to the Middle East, the crew had to sort of pull challenges out of their ass. Lots of simple task mentalities boosted by the occasional local flair, like Pirkma, the tour guide, who has extreme Tata the Bushman energy. The boat challenge in episode 3 works way better than the Australian version, because some of these people are actually trying to do the challenge instead of trying to blow it, and also there's just a better structure to it. Like 2 rounds, switching off who has the poster and who's in the boat, the object being legibility while being yanked along a speedboat. Far more complex and far more enjoyable, mostly because of some nice contestant shenanigans.
Michael Plebs?
Michael Plebs of Michael Pips.
Michael Plebs.
Die kennen ze niet.
After that, they spend the rest of the season in Spain.
En we gingen naar Spanje.
And the rest of the season's a lot better because there the challenge quality grows, mostly because they were able to do the stuff they actually planned. The Wild West laser tag duel is pretty awesome. There's several really cool chase challenges, one at night, another in a bullfight maze, all very tense. The costume challenge in episode 8 is the WIDM crew's version of a US costume challenge. And this one is able to mix silliness and tension pretty well, because you have Tim roaming around the Plaza de España in a sort of flamenco drag look. And it's not just a ha-ha guy in a dress sort of thing. There's still gameplay and tension. I did find it very funny that someone tosses Tim a euro while in drag, and Art at the end of the challenge is like, well, we can add that to the pot, why not? You won it!
But Season 12 is more notable for its almost immediate evolution in gameplay.
Already you're seeing more born strategists, more calculated game bots, more chaotic self-sabotagers coming out of the woodwork. Also, importantly, this cast is more than just actors and TV presenters. We have Martin van de Weyden, an Olympic swimmer, Marion Paw, an author, Dio, a rapper who was allegedly a late addition to casting and had no time to prepare a strategy, hence,
Op hoeveel stappen ben ik nu ongeveer?
Schat, heb je
moet er omheen lopen.
And Fritz Hufnagel, a former politician, one for a liberal-type party, though with that hairstyle he could have had me fooled. It added a more varied, eclectic feel to this season's cast.
Veel intelligenter dan vorig jaar, hè?
Heel goed.
But the problem with the season lies not with the fun characters like Fritz, comedian Tim Camps, and actress Anne-Marie Young. The problem lies with everybody else. This season is overpopulated with one-dimensional game players that just don't have a lot to them, and it results in a lot of really dull gameplay, with a lot of maddening challenge blows. Like, literally, the only time in the first 2 episodes that the group gains any money is when the season's Boy Scout is able to bet that they won't win any money. William Spy is a patient zero of this, as he's almost exclusively a game bot that doesn't really provide much else to the season other than one-note strategy. I was so worried he'd go all the way and win, but thankfully he didn't. I'm also amused by William being a Nationals fan in 2011, before they got Harper. Also like the Nats before Harper, William ends up in 5th place. There's a pretty fair amount of advantages this season. It's not really overdone, but I feel like a lot of time was dedicated to the strategy of them, more than just person-to-person character stuff, and I think that's really where the show was going, it seems. You're also seeing more stylistic changes to WIDM that were hinted at last year. For instance, the average episode length of Season 12 is roughly 9 minutes longer than the previous 11 seasons, and most of that is just establishing shots. You genuinely could get back to the previous runtime just by taking out all the overlong establishing shots. Obviously, the biggest change stylistically is Art Rooijakkers as host.
So remember in the last video I said that it was going to be weird to watch contestant Art now that he's hosted for as long as he did? Well, the thing is, because he was the youngest mole host at the time, and because it's only been a year since he's been on the show, you can still see shades of contestant Art.
Not many, but because he's trying to be the cool, slick host, you can sort of see the same guy who self-sabotaged in Season 11. But I will say Art is already a very confident and intriguing host, and he doesn't have that many jitters, partially because he was a presenter before WIDM.
Jullie hebben een kwartier voor dit tochtje.
Ja?
Want daarna is er gevaar op onderkoeling.
Oh.
The closest Art got to being Gilles de Coster was in the challenge in episode 7, where he asks the players unrelated questions. In fact, something from Art's demeanor this season makes me think that Gilles was somewhat influenced by him. In episode 7, Tim joins him for a coffee, and he sets up the stakes of the challenge while being affable and friendly. He's a lot more of an approachable host than somebody like Peter Jan was, yet he's also very good at being stern and disappointed when he needs to be. What I worried about with Art was that because he was a contestant, he wouldn't have as much status against the players, and in this season he still retains an upper hand. It's nowhere near Ahmad Rashad being ridiculed by the players in Yucatan. Also extremely funny that Art's first season involves an art history challenge, as this is literally the beginning of art history as far as this video is concerned.
Maybe a lame gag, but a lot of British people watch this. The wordplay does well over there.
You're famous for your knowledge about art. Art Rooijakkers.
The season does lead to a very fun Final 3 challenge, a much better version of a challenge Australia Series 6 would do mid-season. I will say this challenge would have been more fun with a better Final 3. Anne-Marie is at the very least a fun character, but there's not a lot to Hadovik and Lisbeth. Lisbeth is honestly a less eccentric version of Hannah from Season 11. I had high hopes for her, but she wasn't much of a character. Same with Hadovik, there wasn't a great deal to her. I'm glad she won rather than being the mole, she was kind of worrying me there. But there's not really that much to say about her. Kind of a dull Final 3 to do this one. Imagine Anne-Marie, Tim, and Fritz doing this challenge. That is so much more fun. Still, the reveal that Lisbeth is actually inside the bridge is pretty incredible. As for Anne-Marie as a mole, sure. You can tell she came on really strong in her first few shows, then immediately pivoted to putting the blame on other people for the rest of the show. At times, she was a bit obvious, and she was, at the very least, fun to watch, but kind of a disappointing outcome. If I can tell early on in the season, it's not a great sign, but I admire some of her long game skills. Season 12 actually does a fair bit correctly, and the middle bit of the season succeeds a great deal. However, around that episode 6 cliff, we start losing great characters and setting up a weak ending. And that, along with the less interesting gameplay, dilutes the aim of this season. There's nothing especially appalling here, save for probably the train wreck that was Dio, but I only see myself going back to rewatch a couple of shows from this.
Voor jullie doen niet slecht. Het kon veel beter.
So for this journey through the history of the show to get anywhere near back on track, it is important that the following season Above all else, have a better cast. Yeah, I think this'll do.
Season 13, which ran from January to March 2013.
Oh, depressing.
It really is that simple. 10 really fun characters were dropped in the middle of South Africa, and thus a really good season of Vias de Mol ensued. Honestly.
Like, any combination of these 10 people would have resulted in a great outcome. Just fun people to hang around with, like comedian Caroline Burgers and her shaggy hair, opera singer Tanya Cross proving that Dutch opera singers are just like that, and radio host Kees Toll completely subverting the trope of the gay guy in reality television. This season also has one of the most iconic first boots in Mol history, with Avro presenter Ewout Gedemans, who didn't do a single thing correctly, confused everyone including Art, and then goes home first. Ewout is the Mol equivalent of Zane Knight, burned out bright and fast. I also really liked journalist Janine Abring, who had a level-headed, intelligent strategy through the first 3 shows. Then there's a cliff jumping challenge, a lot like Belgium Season 10's cliff jumping challenge.
Remember how that cost one of the best strategic players of the season? Weird that it happened twice.
Oh, ik hoop dat zij moeten springen.
Nee, ik wil ook springen.
Oh, ja, echt?
Natuurlijk.
I do love the bit after Janine's medevac where Art goes, "She was a great player, but she might have even been the mole. She wasn't, but she could have been."
So, by episode 3, the crew has been handed a medevac, and it seems like a logical place to put a non-elimination episode, just so they keep the momentum going. But Avro paid for 10 episodes, so they're gonna get 10 episodes, and it's gonna happen in the most haphazard way possible.
Obviously, the Janine medevac put a wrench in their plans, but instead of just not doing an elimination, they go through with it, tell everyone to leave once they got a green screen, leave Tim, give him the "we're sending you home" music, and then in the next show he's just back. Plus the others, without much discussion, agree to free him and return him to the game. If gameplay has progressed, which we just established that it has, then why are people not giving this any thought? He didn't know who the mole was. He shouldn't get a second chance. And yet, away we go.
Tim tegenkomen. Dan zou ik hebben gezegd, lekker peu. De uit is de uit. Doei doei. Zoek het uit met die leeuwen. Dag.
And then this is followed by another consecutive non-elim, as 6 of the 7 are awarded exemptions, and the non-exempt person didn't score the lowest. Then, in episode 5, after being spared for 2 episodes in a row, Tim finally goes home. Why keep him in limbo? It makes a good chunk of the season feel absolutely pointless.
It's like, if you want to cut an episode back, you should be allowed to do that instead of running in place for a 30-year season. And I know people in the comments are going to go, well, you know, you can't change that as the season's going on. Find a way. Talk to an executive. I know I'm just a pleb down here, but there's got to be an easier way than this.
But of course, the power of this cast prevents this from being a grave issue, because the final 7 are the absolute best, and 2 more shows of them certainly worked for me.
En als je kijkt, zie je ons misschien staan. Over.
Ik, wij, Tim en ik zijn geblinddoekt.
Dat is hele goede informatie.
Ja.
Over. Ik weet niks.
Je bent gewoon in een kooi gezet in the middle of nowhere en je dacht, oké.
2 succesvolle acteurs en een complete mogol achterin. Door de safari.
It's a perfect mix of characters. Everyone's doing really good strategic work, but they're all so entertaining doing it. Tanya is there to be the Sundos-type chaotic character, but it's done in a way where she still feels suspicious by the time she goes home.
Ik denk dat er heel veel van Tanya de rijmomenten in slow motion vertoond gaan worden als het eruit ligt.
Daniel worried me because he seemed like he'd take things way too seriously, but he mellowed into a really fun character whose intensity and vigor powered the season. Episode 7 might be the single best send-off to a fall guy ever, because most of the show has this undercurrent of Daniel was right after he correctly predicts that the central tubes have a light-sensitive paper in them when no one else does.
Jesus, weet je? Ongelofelijke sukkel zo. Hadden we bijna niet verkopen zo.
Then, after an hour of Daniel was right, he wins an exemption for the next episode, then gets executed. For someone who was so wired in and confident, it's a very funny taste of reality.
En ik mag vliegen, want ik ben Tom de piloot natuurlijk. Ik ben Tom de piloot gewoon.
Wie is Tom de piloot?
Uit Gooise Vrouwen. Ik mag gewoon vliegen.
Oh, sorry, we hebben je werk helemaal niet paraat. Sorry.
As expected, South Africa was a really nice setting for this season. Perhaps a few more broad strokes than Belgium's version, but I love the number of language challenges. I love the challenge set in a school where Zoraida and Pauline are learning Zulu words from kids. The tube thing works just about as well as you'd expect, but the challenge where the team has to make an old, abandoned building into a makeshift darkroom is great. Also, I love the moment where Pauline finds the larger ladder and is carrying it in exhaustedly. These guys really behave like a family, and I really enjoyed that this season. This season also had a very crucial challenge in the history of Dutch reality television. A backdoor pilot for another reality competition show. There's a challenge where the final 7 play a game of Mafia above a campfire, with 2 pre-selected moles needing to evade the others and eliminate by banishment and kills. This would eventually be spun off into the hit Dutch competition program, Masked Singer NL. No, it's Differaders. And it's fascinating to see that sort of gameplay employed here, amid a completely different game.
Which is fitting, because this season had a mole that was extremely difficult for me to uncover.
Personally, I went through 7 suspects this season, because both of the first 2 boots were on my radar. Then Tim and Zoraida were doing really obvious sabotage. I thought it was Tim even when he went home for 5 seconds. And then after a while I figured it wasn't Zoraida, because that might be the obvious pick.
En als jij de mol bent, heb ik al gezegd, ga ik op mijn kamer papier macheën en dan maak ik een mooie Oscar voor je. En die verf ik geel en die geef ik aan je. En ik draai nek om.
Oh, dat ook. Dat als detail.
Echt.
Somewhere around episode 6, I swore I saw a clue for Pauline, and I started tunneling towards her, because it'd be really funny if the very neurotic, very ditzy comedy writer ended up being the mole. It'd be a really excellent performance. Once Zoraida went before the finale, I figured that any of the final 3 could be a great mole. I knew it wasn't Caroline due to a prior clue, and I just figured that it was Pauline.
Because if it ended up being Case, then that would be the performance of the century. And so it was.
Ik ben de mol.
Case was probably the best Dutch mole yet. He barely crept onto my radar because, as he said, his strategy was being himself and acting like he had nothing to hide, all while he was responsible for some of the most genius and well-thought-out sabotage in mole history. Rigging the treasury vote so he could be in position to keep his identity safe, completely destroying the final challenge by instructing the bartender to reward bills from the pot. Case is just on another level than most Vies de Mol moles, and he did so while being one of the most fun characters and game players of the season. That means that Pauline was the surprise winner, and while I was rooting for Caroline, it does tell a pretty nice story that Pauline went from ditz to dominator, and outdid so many players by latching onto Case and providing excellent sabotage. That is how you do it. And I just think it's really satisfying that it's her, as opposed to a more conventional winning archetype in Caroline. I was really impressed with Season 13, and I think that the cast, location, gameplay, and final outcome were really damn good. There are flaws, like the middle bit, but with the quality of those episodes, I can't stay entirely mad at it. Might be one of my favorites of the series thus far, which is not something I expected to say about an Art era season. Season 14, which aired from January to March 2014.
You hear a lot from this fandom, oh, these 2 seasons are meant to be viewed in tandem. This is a response to this season. And for the most part, I don't really buy into it, but Season 14's casting is a direct response to what worked in Season 13.
2 of its biggest casting decisions directly connect to a cast member from Season 13. Its winner, Mole, and Fall Guy are all in versions of Season 13.
And I think it's pretty comparable in quality to Season 13 as well, though there is a clear winner.
Now, that being said, Season 13 does have better challenges. Season 14, split between Hong Kong and the Philippines, has many basic challenges centering around transportation or communication, and while some of them do utilize the scenery, a lot could be done basically anywhere. There are some cool ideas and concepts here, like bringing back the Evader Challenge as a chase throughout town, a laser tag mission done by boat, and a game of Chinese Whispers done in China. But a lot of these were just fine. The things I remember about these challenges are less how they operated and more about how the cast interacted with them. Heck, there's one episode where these guys do their own rendition of Expedition Robinson, the Dutch version of Survivor, which Art even hosts now. And it's mostly really dull. You know, there they are, sitting on an island, not doing much.
Freek of Willem? Ik heb een sterke hand nodig.
I think the way the actual game of the mole stands out in season 14 has to do with some of the format changes, which makes this season stand out for better or worse.
First off, this season introduced a new kind of exemption, the black exemption.
Verschrikkelijk. Een stomme ding. Ik vind het een kreng. Echt een verschrikkelijk ding.
Playing this negates all played exemptions and jokers that round and doesn't count as an exemption itself. It's essentially an idle nullifier. Which means people hang on to exemptions and play them like hidden immunity idols. Meaning, again, the exemptions don't actually make a person exempt from the quiz. They have to do it anyway. Because in several cases, a black exemption could make an exemption meaningless anyhow. I still don't like how exemptions don't actually let you skip the quiz in WIDM All. This did lead to some good strategic gameplay about when to play it, but it mostly complicated things. And it also leads to an episode where the central conflict concerns a black exemption hiding in Tycho Genarnt's pants.
Hij gaf hem zo even aan mij en dat voelde gelijk heel prettig.
Also overly complicated, the pot interest twist, where each player is given an envelope they can use to bank pot money and send to the finale, sending it to a player they think will be there by episode 9. If they choose correctly, there's interest that accrues on the money, which is a pretty cool idea. It is telling, though, that an impromptu non-elimination episode was added just to ensure that more than 3 people could make it to the finale and heighten the chances of banked money being assigned to finalists. I did like the strategy used here, as at one point a player's envelope is stolen just to ensure money is going to the right place. But yeah, it kinda messes with the sanctity of the pot a little. This season also springs an elimination test on these guys right when they get off the plane, and put a contestant, Daphne, in jeopardy only to say, that's just the first half. You have to see if you don't fail the second half. Like, that's just cruelty. The first 3 shows have 2 or 3 surprise eliminations, and I love the moment where Art knows he sprung so many on them that he just decides to fuck with them.
Maak je klaar.
Nee.
Voor een spannende opdracht.
In a season with so much yanking back and forth, this had a really entertaining cast. A lot of really fun middle-of-the-season guys like Off and Jennifer. I also really liked Sophie. She was hard to read until the moment you saw her strategizing.
But like I said, this season comes down to 2 people who are a direct response to a single casting choice from season 13. And that casting choice is Daniel Boisveen.
I really liked him. He was a very fresh, kind of intense film actor type that could definitely do a lot on the show.
But Daniel himself would foreshadow the direction the show would go in, as well as something that Daniel actually points out. I mean, let's cut to the clip.
Ik ben Tom de piloot gewoon. Wie is Tom de piloot? Uit Gooise Vrouwen. Ik mag gewoon vliegen.
Quietish Women is basically Dutch Sex in the City. Successful series turned into a successful film series. And those movies are huge moneymakers in the Netherlands. So one of Daniel's co-stars in that show, Suzanne Visser, is cast in this season, and that's one. But like I said, now the WIDM All producers know that a strong personality like Daniel works for this show. So they quadrupled down. Which brings me to Tycho Genarnt.
Jongens, ik heb er 17, 18 genoemd. Kom op man, mij misschien 14, 15, maar dat was echt wel goed.
Dag, succes met wat dan ook.
Ik wil Jan Willem.
En bepaal jij wie je wilt? We staan toch nu voor elkaar?
Ik vertrouw niet meer, gek genoeg.
Oké, let's go.
Tycho is someone I was warned about.
People I talked to agreed that while Tycho didn't commit any sins per se, he was just very arrogant, had some subconscious racism, and just, well, Sophie sums it up better than me.
Tycho is zo veel. Veel energie, veel verhalen, veel bravoure.
Tycho is a lot. He's basically the Dutch version of somebody like Paul Grassi, a player who's so intense and so obnoxious that he can turn a lot of people off. And throughout the season, people are playfully shading him and going, get a load of this guy.
Wie had dat gedacht, hè? Tycho in het gareel. Het kan dus toch?
But honestly, I can't imagine a season like this without Tycho.
Yes, he was a lot. Yes, he was infuriating sometimes. But not only could I rule him out as a mole, his gameplay was just really fun to watch. A lot of the time he was right, and it was really cool to watch him in action with this strategy of annoying people.
Ben je kandidaat of mol? Mol? Dat dacht ik al. Ik ook.
Tycho to me is fun. Not as fun as somebody like Sophie, but still fun. And when you have gamebots like Jan Willem and Freak just sticking around and not going home, even if you know what they're being set up for, you need someone like Tycho to make things interesting. So yeah, I kind of knew what roles everybody would play in this after we got to, like, 6. I knew that Off was going to be a sacrificial lamb. I knew Jan Willem wouldn't make it to the end, even if it took forever. I knew Tycho was going to be wrong. And ironically, the final 3 consisted of the 3 most suspicious players when I started the watch. Sophie, Susan, and Freak. Now, I suspected Sophie for a while, but then I saw her gameplay moves and could tell she was getting a winning end. I saw Freak make some early sabotages, but he mostly went into a lawful mode for the rest of the season. And I definitely suspected Susan, because her sabotage was really consistent throughout.
And honestly, I don't blame the editors for what they did in episode 6, because I would have done the same thing.
But they show Susan submitting her banked money to the Ellis Island Fund, and then they show her doing this.
The balls to show that. You can't put that in if it's anyone else but her. You're giving the mole away halfway through. So why reveal the mole that early? Well, because they wanted to make a very specific part of their story evident to us.
Because the very next episode, after it's been made clear that Susan is the mole, we get this from Freek.
Suzanne vertrouw ik volledig. Ik kan me niet voorstellen dat zij de mol is. En als ze dat is, dan verdient ze een Oscar. Meteen.
So we're not only clear on who's winning and who our mole is, but it's clear that someone is being set up to lose, and we're given ringside seats to watch.
The fall of Freek, where he forfeits the win simply by refusing to suspect Susan at all, and Susan knowing this and doing everything she can to keep him around, was incredible. It's the only known instance of a mole using the traitor's pet strategy, keeping someone close to them in the game because they know the person will never go against them. I didn't even know they could do that in the mole. And yes, watching Freek's reaction that his ride or die is the mole, and that he's been wrong the whole time, oh, it's incredible.
Freek. Jij bent ook niet de winnaar.
Ook na de onthulling dat ik dacht, maar hoe in godsnaam ben ik dan hier terechtgekomen?
Nou, vertel het maar.
Dat is een actief.
Such a great ending. Loved Sophie as a winner, loved Freek as a fall guy. Loved that Jan Willem and Tycho got to be fall guys as well. Susan was a decent mole. Yes, I know it was her for a while, and I did like seeing her in the act, but a lot of her stuff was more obvious than anything. I can't really stay mad at her, and she was still a lot of fun, but yeah, coming off of Case, it's a noticeable downgrade. But yeah, I like Season 14. Not perfect, and not as good as Season 13, but with a lot of fun moments, and a fantastic ending, and some of the best storytelling I've seen in a while.
WIDM Juniors Season 2, which aired from March to May 2014. I like to keep promises. I don't really like letting people down. Because way back in the beginning of this project, I promised to cover the WIDM Junior seasons. And I actually, full disclosure, tried watching the first of those from 2008. And thanks to a lack of both subtitles and all of the episodes, it proved fruitless, and so I just decided to give up. So I figured I'd at least make an effort to find the second season of WIDM Juniors, which many people said was closer to an actual show than the first. And while I was finishing this video, some captures and some subtitles practically fell into my hands. So let's talk about WIDM Juniors.
You may be thinking it's a little odd that WIDM had a junior edition, where kids would compete in challenges and find a mole amongst them. But the US had a Teen Survivor, a Junior Master Chef, and whatever the fuck Kid Nation was. Hurry! Television producers will try anything. And there's an audience for more difficult kids shows as well. We had a kids version of Crystal Maze over here, hosted by a rare good famous person in Adam Conover. So it may feel like some Bugsy Malone shit, but there was a market for this.
That being said, the first season is kinda odd.
De eerste executie.
These are infants. The first boot looks like he's gonna cry. The challenges are Legends of the Hidden Temple fodder, and this host, a professional kids show host named Sipke Jan Boezema, is way too kind and accommodating to be truly mysterious to these people.
Season 2 got it right by just having Art do it.
Art is an all-purpose presenter, so he can do kids shows. I think he dialed back his disdain about a centimeter, but he still felt like himself. He's going to host The Mole, and it's not going to be the cute, fun-time mole. No, he still gives the show the seriousness it deserves, while at least being very encouraging towards the show's winner and mole. And being a travel presenter suits him well here, as he does a lot of talking to camera about the main theme of the show, which is environmentalism. The pot gimmick here is that whoever wins doesn't get the money, but the money goes towards the conservation of a specific type of animal they've selected that's in danger, which is at least kind of inspired. There's also this environmentalist message that runs through the season, as there's little nods to fighting climate change or the evolving natural world. There's also a ton of plugs for the World Wildlife Foundation. Sometimes this does get in the way of the tension, as the Final Four interrogation mission is undercut by 3 players watching informational videos on preserving animals rather than, like, I don't know, something really bizarre they'd have to lie about. Maybe playing the feet of Al in the funhouse room just for old time's sake. I get why they do it. There's child labor laws that make it difficult to just outright give kids prize money. But it does undercut the journey a bit when Davey wins all this money and he's got to give it to the conservation of gorillas.
€1,000 to gorilla conservation. And yet it still couldn't save Harambe.
Also, having a cast of underage contestants means the travel laws are strict too, so this was a season shot domestically, around the south of the Netherlands. There's pluses and minuses to that. There's not really a language barrier, though it's extremely funny that in episode 1, they keep running into people around town that don't speak Dutch. They're in the fucking Netherlands. This isn't Nicaragua. There's also not a ton of truly unconquered territory and customs these guys can interact with, and in some cases they're just talking to tour guides and mayors like it's a class trip. But on the other hand, like with a lot of Europe set seasons, the personality of the location comes from its people. There's something very sweet about the final challenge, where Davey has to follow a path of umbrellas handed to townspeople to guide him to the others, and it shows the strength of having a season set in the Netherlands is that Dutch people are generally very helpful and very accommodating. It makes for a really triumphant finish. The challenges in general are alright. Steps up from the first junior season, but still kind of basic. Lots of getting around town challenges and the usual staples of canoeing or abseiling. The marching band memory game from episode 4 is a clever idea. Obviously, it's a young person's activity, but done on a larger scale, and it gets them thinking. I also like the challenge where they have to find numbers in a field, but can't say numbers over the walkies. It leads to some fun demerits.
En dan komen we op 1989. Niet de getallen opnoemen. Oeps. Ja, 4 getallen. Door de porto. Niet zo heel slim.
And this season gets my respect for producing an actual tense, effective laser game.
By this point, they do the laser tag challenge so often that people on these seasons start actively expecting them every season. And around here on WIDM, it got to the point where they were just kind of there to be there. So it's weird that the junior version produces a truly great iteration of this.
It all comes down to a showdown between Guido and Davey, who's christened himself the next James Bond, which, have fun with that, Amazon.
Game over. Thank you.
Yes.
And you get tension and excitement that even the regular version's laser games didn't have. This cast has more to it than the first go-around because the production team smartly realized they should skew older. With more fully formed personalities, you get people like Harmon, a schemer that I was expecting to win, Guido, the blunt force of reason that I was also expecting to win, and Floor, who had a very straightforward and entertaining disposition that attempted to distract me from the fact that somebody named their kid Floor.
I really tried to take this season seriously. It was not easy for me.
I also like what this season did with its 4 lead characters. Davey was a bit arrogant and had some moments of mean-spiritedness, but he was ultimately an endearing and engaging protagonist. Maybe he got some kids prepared for a player like Tycho, who knows? Roland's luck this season is hysterical. He's a very fun leader-type character with a big personality, but he loses his mole journal twice, he nearly gets an exemption for the finale but passes it up, then drops one of his jokers while abseiling. He still makes it to the end, catching onto the mole first, but gets lapped by Davey.
And like with Season 14 of the regular version, WIDM Juniors 2 had a very cool Trader's Pet style storyline.
It takes 12 minutes in episode 1 for anyone to mention anyone else being the mole. and it is this confessional from Jitske.
Ik vertrouw Jenny wel een beetje. Het is heel lullig als Jenny straks mol is, maar ik vertrouw haar nu wel een beetje.
I mean, this is a kids program. They are educational in a sense, so I suppose they were just teaching the kids about deliberately editing foreshadowing. The adult version just had this. And now we have this, the first time anyone actually talks about who the mole might be. And not only is Jitske wrong, but Jenny takes advantage of this throughout the game.
Not only does it take 6 episodes for anyone to latch onto her, but she routinely has Jitske in the palm of her hand. In episode 7, she gets Jitske to believe her well enough to forfeit her own exemption, making her vulnerable for the last execution before the finale, and her loyalty to Jenny does her in. It's an incredible development. Jenny wasn't a perfect mole, as she was under the radar in a lot of episodes and then flagrant late, but she did a lot right. The best thing she did was letting everybody gain her trust in the first mission so that they'd let her be the treasurer, a job she keeps throughout the season.
It's an underrated skill as a mole to pick your moments not to sabotage in order to skew an outcome. And as I'm going to get to during a much later season, sometimes it's a necessary tactic.
And even if both finalists circled Jenny by the end, the reveal that it was her still caught them both off guard.
Ja, en dan de pot nog krijgen op dag 1 ook.
That's the takeaway. Even if I wasn't wild about Davy winning, or wished there was more clear sabotage, or wished we didn't waste blocks talking about saving the planet, this season still had a mole that fooled the majority of the players, many of whom were actually handling more advanced gameplay tactics. Ultimately, I am glad I watched Juniors 2, because I got to see really cool mole gameplay from Jenny, and it was a nice, breezy little watch in between some heavier art seasons. I actually think I rank this season above some regular seasons from this era.
And that's the really strange thing about WIDM Juniors 2. I can definitely see myself bringing up elements of this season when talking about some future regulation seasons. I mean, you can't exactly say that about any season of Endurance.